There was a time in my life when I believed something quietly dangerous. I believed that if I could just be more agreeable, more understanding, more likable, then life would feel easier. I thought peace came from keeping everyone comfortable. I thought strength meant being flexible enough to fit into whatever people expected of me. What I didn't realize back then was that every time I tried to be liked, I was slowly stepping away from myself. I said yes when I meant no. I explained myself even when I didn't need to. I softened my opinions so no one would feel challenged, and on the surface, things looked fine. No conflict, no tension, no obvious problems. But inside, something was quietly eroding. I felt tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I felt disconnected from my own voice, and worst of all, I started to feel like I was living a version of life that wasn't fully mine. That's when I began to notice something about mentally strong people. They weren't chasing approval. They weren't trying to be impressive. They weren't constantly checking how they were being perceived. And interestingly, not everyone liked them. Some people felt uncomfortable around them. Some misread them as cold, distant, or difficult. But those people had something I didn't have at the time. They had peace. Mental strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't beg to be understood. It shows up quietly in the way someone stands by their values without needing applause, in the way they can disappoint others without collapsing into guilt, in the way they can be misunderstood and still sleep well at night. This audiobook isn't about becoming unkind, and it's not about pushing people away. It's about something much deeper and more honest. It's about learning what happens when you stop outsourcing your self-worth to the opinions of others. Because here's a truth most people don't talk about. When you stop needing to be liked, you don't lose your humanity. You regain it. You start making decisions based on clarity instead of fear. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking your boundaries just to avoid discomfort. And slowly, something shifts. You feel lighter, calmer, more grounded in who you are. That shift can feel lonely at first. When you stop performing, some people won't know how to relate to you anymore. When you stop overgiving, some connections naturally fade. That can hurt. I won't pretend it doesn't. But what replaces that noise is something far more valuable: self-respect. Over the next hour, we're going to explore why mentally strong people don't need to be liked, why that often makes them misunderstood, and why that misunderstanding is not a flaw, but a sign of growth. We'll talk about boundaries, emotional independence, calm confidence, and the quiet power that comes from standing firmly in who you are. If you've ever felt exhausted from trying to please everyone, if you've ever felt guilty for choosing yourself, if you've ever sensed that there must be a stronger, calmer way to live, then this is for you. And before we continue, if this message already resonates with you, I want you to do one small thing. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling to please everyone. Someone who's losing themselves in the process. This might be exactly what they need to start improving their life. Chapter 1. The hidden cost of wanting to be liked. Wanting to be liked is not a weakness. It's human. From an early age, we learn that approval keeps us safe. It keeps us included. It keeps conflict away. We learn to read the room, adjust our tone, soften our edges, and make ourselves easier to accept. At first, this skill feels like emotional intelligence. It feels mature. It feels kind. But over time, if you're not careful, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a habit of self-erasure. I didn't see this clearly until much later. For a long time, I told myself I was just being considerate. I didn't want to upset people. I didn't want to be difficult. I didn't want to create tension where there didn't need to be any. So I adapted. Constantly. I changed how I spoke depending on who was in front of me. I filtered my opinions. I delayed decisions just to avoid disappointing someone else. And the strange part was, people liked me for it. But I didn't like myself very much. That's the hidden cost most people never calculate. When you build your identity around being liked, you pay for it with small, daily withdrawals from your sense of self. Each one feels insignificant. A harmless yes, a quiet apology, an explanation you didn't owe. But over time, those withdrawals add up, and one day you wake up feeling exhausted, resentful, and oddly disconnected from your own life. Not because people are cruel, but because you've been living on borrowed approval. Mentally strong people learn this lesson the hard way. They discover, often through burnout, frustration, or quiet despair, that being liked is a poor foundation for a stable inner life. Approval is unstable. It changes with mood, context, power, and perception. What earns praise in one room can invite criticism in another. What makes you acceptable today can make you invisible tomorrow. So if your sense of worth depends on it, you'll always be adjusting, always scanning, always tense. That tension lives in the body long before it shows up in your thoughts. It's the tightness in your chest before saying no, the second guessing after every conversation, the mental replay of moments where you wonder if you said too much or not enough. I remember noticing this pattern clearly one evening. I had agreed to help with something I didn't have the time or energy for. I knew it the moment I said yes. My body reacted before my mind could justify it. A subtle heaviness, a quiet irritation, and then, almost immediately, guilt for feeling irritated at all. That moment taught me something important. My emotions weren't the problem. My lack of boundaries was. When you want to be liked, you often confuse kindness with compliance. You mistake flexibility for strength. You tell yourself that being easygoing makes you mature, when in reality, you're avoiding the discomfort of standing firmly in your own needs. Mental strength begins when you stop doing that. Not dramatically, not aggressively, but honestly. It begins when you notice how often your decisions are shaped by fear of disapproval rather than clarity of values. When you ask yourself not, will they like this, but can I live with this? That question changes everything, because here's the truth most people avoid. Being liked feels good in the moment, but it erodes self-trust over time. And self-trust is what mentally strong people protect above all else. They understand that if they betray themselves too often, no amount of external approval can make up for it. This is why mentally strong people sometimes appear distant or selective. It's not because they lack empathy. It's because they've learned how expensive overavailability can be. They've felt the quiet resentment that comes from overgiving. They've lived the fatigue of constantly being on. And they've chosen something different. They've chosen internal alignment over external validation. That choice doesn't make life easier right away. In fact, it often does the opposite. When you stop bending, people notice. When you pause before agreeing, people feel the shift. Some will test your boundaries. Some will push. Some will accuse you of changing. And in a way, they're right. You are changing. You're no longer organizing your life around being acceptable. You're organizing it around being honest. That honesty starts in small places. Saying, I can't commit to that right now. Allowing silence instead of rushing to fill it. Letting someone feel disappointed without rushing to fix it. These moments feel uncomfortable because they challenge an old survival strategy. But they also feel strangely relieving. Like taking off a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. The goal here isn't to become indifferent to others. Mentally strong people still care deeply. They just don't sacrifice themselves to earn belonging. They understand that real connection doesn't come from self-betrayal. It comes from presence, from clarity, from showing up as you are, not as who you think will be easiest to accept. This chapter isn't asking you to stop wanting connection. It's asking you to examine the price you're paying for it. Because when being liked becomes more important than being at peace, you lose something essential. You lose your inner anchor, And without that anchor, every opinion becomes a wave that can pull you off course. Mental strength begins the moment you decide that your sense of self is not negotiable. Not everyone will like that version of you, but you will. And that's where real stability starts. Chapter 2. Mental strength changes your social position. There's a moment that comes after you stop chasing approval. It's subtle at first. Nothing dramatic happens. No confrontation, no announcement, but the way people respond to you begins to shift. Conversations feel slightly different. Expectations change, and you may not immediately understand why. What's changing isn't your personality, it's your position. When you no longer need to be liked, you stop unconsciously placing yourself beneath others. You stop leaning forward emotionally. You stop adjusting your tone to manage reactions. You stop offering reassurance before anyone has asked for it. And without realizing it, you change the social dynamic in every room you enter. Most people don't notice how much of their behavior is driven by a quiet question running in the background. How am I being perceived right now? That question shapes posture, word choice, timing, even silence. When approval matters, your nervous system is always scanning, always calculating, always ready to adapt. Mental strength quiets that noise. And when that noise goes away, people feel it. I remember the first time I noticed this shift in myself. I was in a conversation where I would normally over-explain my reasoning, soften my words, and check for agreement. This time, I didn't. I stated my decision calmly and stopped talking. There was a pause. A longer one than usual. Not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. No one argued. No one pushed back. But something had changed. The room felt different. That's when I realized something important. People don't respond to explanations as much as they respond to certainty. Not loud certainty, not aggressive certainty, but calm, grounded clarity. When you speak without needing approval, others sense that you're not negotiating your identity. You're simply expressing it. This is why mentally strong people are often described as hard to read. They're not performing. They're not trying to manage impressions. They're present, but not exposed. Engaged, but not over-invested. That balance creates a quiet authority that can feel unsettling to people who rely on emotional cues to find their footing. It's not dominance, it's self-possession. And self-possession subtly rearranges social hierarchies. When you don't need validation, you stop chasing attention. When you stop chasing attention, you stop reacting to it. That lack of reactivity removes leverage others unconsciously expect to have. There's no button to push, no insecurity to exploit, no emotional reward for approval or disapproval. Some people respect this immediately. Others feel uneasy. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because the rules they're used to no longer apply. This is where many people get confused. They assume that mental strength is about confidence tricks or power moves. It's not. The power comes from consistency, from behaving the same whether you're praised, criticized, or ignored, from letting your actions speak without needing a narrative to support them. I noticed this, especially in moments of disagreement. Before, I would rush to clarify, soften, or defend my point. I wanted to make sure no one felt uncomfortable. But discomfort isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's just the natural result of honesty. When I stopped managing that discomfort for others, discussions became shorter, clearer, more focused. Not everyone liked that. But conversations became more real. Mental strength doesn't make you intimidating because you're harsh. It makes you noticeable because you're grounded. You're no longer blending into emotional expectations. You're standing on your own internal footing. And that changes how people orient themselves around you. This shift also reveals something important about your relationships. Some connections thrive when you stop overgiving. They deepen. They become more balanced. Others weaken. Not because you've changed for the worse, but because the relationship depended on your emotional flexibility, on your willingness to bend, absorb, and adjust. When that stops, the dynamic collapses. That can be painful. It can feel like rejection, but it's actually information. Mental strength clarifies who relates to you as a person and who relates to you as a role. Roles require performance. People require presence. And presence doesn't need approval. This is why mentally strong people often seem more reserved. They're not withholding, they're selective. They understand that attention is energy, and energy is finite. They choose where to invest it instead of scattering it in every direction. That choice alone changes how others perceive them. You may notice people listening more closely when you speak, or projecting assumptions onto you, or feeling uncertain about where they stand. That uncertainty isn't your responsibility to fix. It's the natural response to someone who isn't broadcasting emotional cues for easy interpretation. At first, this can feel lonely. When you stop signaling for approval, you stop receiving constant feedback. The silence can be unsettling if you're used to validation as reassurance. But over time, that silence becomes spacious, peaceful. You start to hear yourself more clearly. You trust your own judgment instead of waiting for echoes from others, and something unexpected happens. You feel steadier, not because everyone agrees with you, but because you're no longer outsourcing your stability. Mental strength doesn't elevate you above others. It centers you within yourself. From that center, you relate differently. You listen without absorbing. You care without collapsing. You engage without losing your grounding. That grounded presence is rare, and rarity always changes the dynamic. This chapter isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unmovable in the places that matter. When you no longer need to be liked, you don't withdraw from the world. You meet it on your own terms, and in doing so, you quietly change the position you occupy in every interaction, not through force, but through self-respect. That is the real shift mental strength creates. Chapter 3. Why being misunderstood is inevitable. There is a moment in every mentally strong person's life when they realize something uncomfortable. No matter how clearly you live, some people will never see you accurately. Not because you failed to explain yourself, but because understanding you would require them to confront something within themselves. Being misunderstood is not an accident on the path of inner strength. It is part of the path. When you stop needing to be liked, you also stop shaping your behavior to fit other people's expectations. You no longer mirror their emotions. You no longer adjust your values to maintain harmony. You no longer play the familiar roles that make interactions predictable. And when predictability disappears, interpretation fills the gap. People begin to project. They assume motives. They assign labels. They build stories. Not about who you are, but about what your presence triggers in them. I used to believe that if I could just communicate more clearly, misunderstandings would disappear. That if I explained my intentions calmly enough, kindly enough, people would eventually see the truth. So I tried. I clarified. I overclarified. I walked people through my reasoning step by step. I softened my tone. I added context. I tried to make myself impossible to misread. It didn't work. In fact, it often made things worse. The more I explained, the more I invited debate. The more I defended myself, the more it looked like uncertainty. And the more I tried to control how I was perceived, the less grounded I felt. That's when I started to understand a difficult truth. Misunderstanding is not always caused by lack of information. Sometimes it's caused by emotional resistance. When you change, people don't just see your behavior. They feel the loss of the version of you that made them comfortable. And that loss gets interpreted as distance, coldness, arrogance, or indifference. Mentally strong people accept this without bitterness. They understand that clarity does not guarantee agreement, and honesty does not guarantee understanding. Other people filter you through their own fears, insecurities, and experiences. You cannot manage those filters without losing yourself. so they stop trying. That doesn't mean they become careless with their words. It means they become selective with their energy. They learn to recognize the difference between someone who is genuinely curious and someone who is emotionally invested in misunderstanding them. One conversation is worth having, the other is not. This distinction changes everything. I remember a moment when someone close to me accused me of becoming distant. In the past, that would have sent me into explanation mode. I would have listed reasons, reassured intentions, and tried to restore the old dynamic. This time, I paused. I listened, and I realized something quietly important. They weren't asking to understand me. They were asking me to return to who I used to be, and I couldn't do that anymore. So I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I simply said calmly, "This is who I am now." The silence that followed was heavy, unresolved, but it was honest. And when I walked away from that conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt before: relief. Being misunderstood hurts most when you still need approval, when you're still hoping that clarity will earn acceptance. But when you no longer need to be liked, misunderstanding loses its power. It becomes information instead of a threat. It tells you where you stand. It reveals who relates to you as you are, and who only related to your compliance. This is why mentally strong people often appear comfortable with ambiguity. They don't rush to correct assumptions. They don't chase narratives. They let people believe what they believe. Not out of apathy, but out of self-trust. They know who they are, and that knowledge doesn't require external confirmation. That kind of inner certainty is rare. Most people are still negotiating their identity through feedback, through reactions, through being seen a certain way. So when they encounter someone who isn't doing that, it disrupts the unspoken agreement of social life. The agreement that says, "I'll perform and you'll respond." When you stop performing, the script breaks. And broken scripts make people uncomfortable. Some will lean in, some will step away, some will rewrite you entirely to make sense of the discomfort. Let them. Mental strength doesn't mean you enjoy being misunderstood. It means you can tolerate it without betraying yourself. You can feel the sting without rushing to fix it. You can allow people to leave without chasing closure. That tolerance creates a deeper kind of peace, one that isn't dependent on alignment. There's also a quiet freedom that comes with this acceptance. When you stop managing perceptions, you regain mental space. You think more clearly. You speak more honestly. You act more decisively. You're no longer split between who you are and who you're trying to appear to be. That integration is powerful. It allows you to move through the world without constantly checking your reflection in other people's eyes. It allows relationships to form naturally, based on resonance rather than effort. And it filters your life in ways that feel almost effortless. Not everyone will stay, but the ones who do will meet you as a person, not a performance. Being misunderstood is not a sign that you've failed socially. It's often a sign that you've stopped bending psychologically, that you've chosen internal alignment over external comfort, that you're no longer willing to trade your clarity for temporary harmony. This chapter is not an invitation to withdraw. It's an invitation to release the exhausting belief that you must be fully understood to live well. You don't. You need to be honest with yourself. You need to act with integrity. You need to stand by your values when no one is applauding. The rest will sort itself out. And when you finally accept that misunderstanding is inevitable, not because you are unclear, but because you are no longer controllable, you step into a deeper level of mental strength, one where peace matters more than perception. Chapter 4. Strong Boundaries. Feel uncomfortable. At first, one of the first things you notice when you start building mental strength is discomfort. Not the dramatic kind, not chaos or conflict, but a quiet, persistent unease that shows up the moment you stop over-explaining, over-giving, or over-accommodating. It feels unfamiliar because it is. You're stepping out of an old pattern that once kept you safe. Boundaries don't feel empowering in the beginning. They feel awkward. You hesitate before speaking. Your chest tightens before saying no. Your mind searches for a softer version of the truth, something more acceptable, something easier to receive. This reaction isn't a weakness, it's conditioning. You've spent years learning that harmony comes from self-adjustment, not self-respect. So when you finally choose clarity, your nervous system protests. I remember the first time I set a clear boundary without cushioning it. No long explanation, no apology, just a calm statement of what I could and couldn't do. The moment passed quietly, but inside, everything was loud. My heart raced, my thoughts spiraled. I replayed the interaction again and again, wondering if I had been too firm, too cold, too much. Nothing bad happened. No confrontation, no fallout, no rejection. But the discomfort lingered. Not because I had done something wrong, but because I had broken an old rule. Keep everyone comfortable, even at your own expense. That rule is deeply ingrained. It's reinforced by praise, by social reward, by the idea that being easy makes you good. Boundaries disrupt that narrative. They introduce friction, and friction at first feels like failure. But it isn't. Strong boundaries don't make life harsher. They make it clearer. They define where you end and others begin. Without them, your energy leaks everywhere. With them, your life gains structure. But structure always feels restrictive before it feels supportive. This is why many people abandon boundaries too early. They interpret discomfort as a sign they're doing something wrong. They mistake emotional unease for moral failure. So they retreat, they soften, they apologize. They return to the familiar comfort of self-erasure. Mentally strong people don't do that. They stay with the discomfort long enough to learn from it. They notice that the guilt they feel isn't coming from harm caused. It's coming from an internalized belief that their needs are inconvenient. They recognize that the anxiety isn't proof of wrongdoing. It's the echo of an old survival strategy losing its grip. Boundaries test the stories you tell yourself. Stories like, if I say no, I'll be rejected. If I don't explain, I'll be misunderstood. If I prioritize myself, I'm being selfish. Most of these stories collapse under observation. I noticed this slowly. Each time I held a boundary, something surprising happened. The world didn't end. People adjusted. Some respected it immediately. Some didn't. But even when others were disappointed, I felt a strange sense of alignment. My actions matched my values. And that alignment brought a calm I hadn't felt before. That calm is the reward for mental strength, but it's not immediate. It comes after repetition. After you prove to yourself that you can tolerate temporary discomfort without abandoning yourself. After you realize that your worth isn't dependent on emotional smoothness. Strong boundaries also reveal something uncomfortable about your relationships. Some people will welcome them. They'll feel safer around you because expectations are clear. Others will resist them, not because the boundary is unreasonable, but because it disrupts a dynamic they benefited from. When you stop overgiving, those who relied on that access will feel the loss. This is where many people feel tempted to retreat. They mistake resistance for proof they've gone too far. But resistance is often just adjustment. People recalibrate when patterns change. That process isn't always graceful, and it's not your responsibility to manage it. Mental strength means allowing others to feel what they feel without rushing to fix it. This is especially difficult if you've been praised your whole life for being understanding, patient, or accommodating. Those traits aren't flaws. But when they exist without boundaries, they become liabilities. They train others to expect access without consent. Boundaries reintroduce consent into your life. Consent over your time, consent over your energy, consent over your emotional availability. That consent feels foreign at first. You may second-guess yourself. You may feel the urge to justify, to soften, to explain. But each time you resist that urge, you reinforce something deeper than confidence. You reinforce self-trust. Self-trust grows quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It forms through small acts of consistency, through honoring your limits even when no one applauds, through choosing clarity even when it feels uncomfortable. I began to notice how my internal dialogue changed as my boundaries strengthened. I stopped asking, "Was that okay?" and started asking, "Was that honest?" I stopped measuring interactions by how smooth they felt and started measuring them by how aligned they were. That shift changed everything. Boundaries stopped feeling like walls and started feeling like structure, like the frame of a house that allows space to exist without collapsing. Within that structure, I could be generous without resentment, present without exhaustion, kind without self-betrayal. Strong boundaries don't isolate you. They filter your life. They create room for relationships that respect you and distance from those that require you to shrink. That filtering process can feel lonely, especially in the beginning. But loneliness born from self-respect is quieter than the loneliness of constant self-denial. This chapter isn't about becoming rigid. It's about becoming clear, about understanding that discomfort is not a warning sign, it's a growth signal. It tells you you're leaving an old pattern behind. Mental strength isn't proven by how comfortable you can make others. It's proven by how honestly you can live with yourself. The discomfort will pass. The clarity will remain.
Chapter 5. Why calm? Confidence is often mistaken for coldness. When you stop seeking approval, one of the most surprising reactions you'll encounter is this. People may start describing you as cold. Not openly, not always directly, but subtly, through tone, distance, or assumptions. You speak less, and suddenly you're aloof. You pause before responding, and now you're unemotional. You don't react the way you used to, and something feels off to them. What they're reacting to isn't coldness, it's the absence of emotional performance. Most social environments are built on visible signals, smiles to reassure, reactions to confirm engagement, emotional mirroring to maintain comfort. When you remove those signals, not out of disinterest but out of calm, people can feel unanchored. They're used to reading energy, not presence. So when presence replaces performance, it gets misinterpreted. I noticed this shift in myself gradually. I wasn't trying to be distant. I simply stopped filling every silence. I stopped reacting immediately to things that once would have triggered explanation or defense. I listened more. I spoke when I had something clear to say. And almost without warning, the feedback changed. You've changed. You're quieter lately. You seem different. None of these comments were accusations, but they carried confusion, as if my calm had disrupted an unspoken expectation. I realized then how much people rely on emotional cues to feel secure. When those cues disappear, they search for explanations. Coldness is an easy one. Calm confidence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush to prove warmth. It doesn't compete for attention. It sits comfortably in silence, and silence, for many people, is uncomfortable. Not because it's empty, but because it offers no immediate reassurance. Mentally strong people understand this. They know that being expressive isn't the same as being sincere, that reacting isn't the same as caring, and that you don't owe emotional access just to make others feel at ease. This doesn't mean withdrawing or withholding connection. It means choosing when and how you engage, rather than reacting out of habit. That choice creates space, and space can feel like distance to those who are used to constant feedback. I remember a conversation where someone shared a strong opinion, clearly expecting a reaction. In the past, I would have nodded, countered, or softened the moment with agreement. This time I listened.
I took a breath and I responded calmly, without urgency or defense. The reaction was immediate, a pause, a subtle shift in posture. Something unspoken had changed. Later, I was told I seemed unmoved, but inside I felt clear. That clarity is what calm confidence looks like from the inside. From the outside, it doesn't always translate well. People often equate emotional intensity with authenticity. If you're not visibly reactive, they assume you're disconnected. But mental strength isn't about dampening emotion. It's about regulating it. It's about choosing response over reflex. That regulation can feel unsettling to those who are used to emotional exchange as validation. When you don't meet their energy, they may interpret it as rejection. When you don't mirror their excitement or frustration, they may feel unseen. This is where many people are tempted to revert. They soften, they are reassured, they explain. They bring back the old signals to restore comfort, but doing so comes at a cost. Each time you override your natural calm to manage someone else's perception, you reinforce the belief that your presence isn't enough, that you must perform to be accepted. Mentally strong people resist that urge. They allow themselves to be misread rather than misaligned. They understand that warmth doesn't require constant display, that depth doesn't need volume, that confidence can be quiet and still be felt. Calm confidence also changes the pace of interaction. It slows things down. Conversations become less reactive, more deliberate. Decisions feel less rushed. Emotions don't escalate as easily. This shift can be deeply uncomfortable for people who are accustomed to urgency. Urgency feels alive. Calm feels empty until you learn to sit with it. But once you do, you realize calm isn't empty at all. It's spacious. It gives you room to think, to choose, to remain grounded. And that grounding is what people actually respond to, even if they don't consciously understand it. Over time, I noticed something else. While some people pulled away, others leaned in. They spoke more honestly. They listened more closely. They felt safer sharing things without emotional pressure. The calm created a different kind of connection, one based on presence, not performance. That's the paradox of calm confidence. It repels those who need constant emotional validation, and it attracts those who value clarity and depth. You can't control which group someone falls into, and you don't need to. Your job isn't to manage interpretations, it's to remain aligned with yourself. Being mistaken for cold is often the price of emotional independence. It's the result of no longer broadcasting your inner state for public reassurance. It's the outcome of trusting that your intentions don't need constant translation. That doesn't mean you stop being kind. It means your kindness becomes quieter, more intentional, less reactive, and therefore more real. If you're used to being expressive, this transition can feel strange. You might wonder if you're losing something, if you're becoming less open. But what you're actually losing is the compulsion to be seen a certain way. And what you gain is freedom. Freedom from emotional over-explanation. Freedom from constant signaling. Freedom from needing to prove warmth through reaction. Calm confidence doesn't ask to be understood. It doesn't chase connections. It allows relationships to form naturally, without pressure. And while that may feel lonely at times, it's also deeply stabilizing. This chapter isn't about becoming distant. It's about becoming centered, about recognizing that your nervous system doesn't need to be on display to be valid, that your presence alone carries weight. Some people will call that coldness. Let them. Those who matter will feel the difference between indifference and restraint, between withdrawal and self-possession. And those who don't were never responding to you in the first place, only to the version of you that kept them comfortable. Calm confidence may not always be liked, but it is always honest, and honesty is the foundation of mental strength. Chapter 6. You lose some people. When you stop needing approval. One of the quiet truths about mental strength is this. When you stop needing approval, some people will leave your life. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. Conversations shorten, invitations fade. The emotional closeness you once shared becomes thinner, less responsive. And at first, this can feel like loss. It is a loss, but not in the way most people think. For a long time, I believed that relationships were meant to last if you tried hard enough. If you were patient, if you were understanding, if you were willing to bend a little more. I thought distance meant failure. That drifting apart meant someone had done something wrong. What I didn't understand then was that some connections survive on approval, not alignment. When you stop needing to be liked, you stop feeding certain dynamics. You stop validating insecurity. You stop absorbing emotions that aren't yours. You stop playing the role that kept things familiar. And when that role disappears, the relationship no longer knows how to function. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Mentally strong people don't lose others because they become selfish or detached. They lose others because they stop over-functioning. They stop being the emotional glue holding things together. And when they do, the imbalance becomes visible. I noticed this most clearly with people who were used to my availability. Not just my time, but my emotional openness. I used to listen endlessly. I used to reassure myself instinctively. I used to smooth over tension before it had a chance to settle. When I stopped doing that, the shift was immediate. Some people adapted, others didn't. The ones who adapted began meeting me halfway. Conversations became more mutual. Respect replaced expectation. Those connections grew stronger. The ones who didn't adapt grew distant, not out of malice, but out of confusion. The version of me they related to no longer existed. That realization was painful. It felt personal, like rejection, like I wasn't enough anymore. But with time, I began to see it differently. They hadn't lost me. They had lost access to a version of me that no longer served either of us. Approval-based relationships feel warm, but they're fragile. They depend on constant affirmation, on emotional flexibility, on one person being more accommodating than the other. When that accommodation ends, the relationship either recalibrates or dissolves. Mental strength forces that recalibration. This is why the process can feel lonely, not because you're isolating yourself, but because you're no longer propping things up. Silence replaces constant contact. Space replaces emotional intensity. And if you're not used to that space, it can feel like emptiness. But it isn't. It's honesty. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with this shift. You're not mourning a person as much as you're mourning a shared pattern, a rhythm you once knew, a role you once played. And it's natural to question yourself during that phase, to wonder if you've become too rigid, too distant, too independent. But independence isn't the enemy of connection. Dependence disguised as closeness is. Mentally strong people understand that relationships should add to your life, not drain it. That mutual respect feels different from mutual need, and that being needed is not the same as being valued. This distinction takes time to settle. I remember a moment when I realized a particular connection had changed for good. There was no argument, no final conversation, just a gradual awareness that the effort was no longer mutual. I could have stepped in, explained, reassured, re-established the old dynamic, but something in me resisted, not out of pride, out of self-respect. I let the distance remain. That decision hurt more than I expected. But it also taught me something essential. Mental strength isn't just about holding boundaries with others. It's about holding them with yourself. About not rushing to fill space just to avoid discomfort. About allowing things to end when they no longer align. When you stop needing approval, you also stop negotiating your worth. You no longer chase reassurance. You no longer perform for closeness. And without that performance, Some people feel lost. They were responding to the effort, not the essence. That doesn't make them bad people. It makes the dynamic unsustainable. Over time, you begin to see the difference between relationships rooted in familiarity and those rooted in respect. Familiarity thrives on habit, on predictability, on roles. Respect thrives on boundaries, on clarity, on mutual choice. Mental strength shifts you from the first to the second. That shift can feel isolating, especially if you're surrounded by people who haven't made it yet. But isolation is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness comes from being unseen while surrounded. Isolation, in this context, is simply the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And that space is temporary. As you continue to live without needing approval, new connections begin to form. Quieter ones, slower ones, people who don't demand performance, who doesn't need constant reassurance, who relate to you as you are, not as who they want you to be. These relationships feel different. There's less intensity, less urgency, less drama, but there's more ease, more trust, more room to breathe. This chapter isn't about glorifying loss. It's about reframing it, understanding that when you lose people by becoming more honest, you're not losing connection, you're losing misalignment. Mental strength doesn't promise you'll keep everyone. It promises that the ones who stay will meet you without conditions, and that is worth the space it takes to get there. You don't stop needing people when you stop needing approval. You stop needing to be someone else to keep them. That distinction is the turning point, and once you cross it, there's no going back, only forward, with fewer attachments and deeper roots. Chapter 7. The Quiet Power of Not Explaining Yourself. One of the most uncomfortable habits to let go of on the path to mental strength is the need to explain yourself. Not thoughtful communication, not clarity, but compulsive explanation. The kind that rushes in when silence appears. The kind that tries to preempt misunderstanding. The kind that seeks permission to exist as you are. Most people explain themselves far more than they realize. They explain their decisions. They explain their boundaries. They explain their emotions. And often, they do it not to be understood, but to be accepted. I used to do this constantly. If I changed my mind, I explained why. If I declined something, I justified it. If someone seemed uncomfortable with my choice, I felt an urge to soften it with context, reassurance, or apology. I told myself I was being considerate. In reality, I was negotiating my right to choose. Mental strength begins when you stop doing that. Not because explanations are bad, but because not every situation requires one. And when you explain out of fear, fear of conflict, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, you teach others something subtle but powerful, that your choices are up for debate. The quiet power of not explaining yourself lies in reclaiming authority over your own life. When you stop over-explaining, you stop inviting approval into places where it doesn't belong. You draw a line between communication and permission. You allow your actions to stand without commentary, and that changes how people respond to you. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Silence lingers. Questions hang unanswered. You sense expectations forming, and every instinct urges you to fill the space, to clarify, to justify, to make it easier. But if you stay still, if you let the moment breathe, you begin to notice something surprising. Most explanations weren't needed in the first place. I remember the first time I chose not to explain a decision I knew was right for me. Someone asked why. I paused. I felt the familiar tension rise, the urge to make it understandable, to make it acceptable. Instead, I said simply, "It's what works for me." That was it. The conversation moved on. No argument, no confrontation, no fallout. But inside, something shifted. I realized how often I'd been giving away power without noticing. Not through weakness, but through habit. through the belief that being clear meant being exhaustive, that being kind meant being transparent to the point of self-exposure. Mental strength teaches you the difference. Clarity is about truth. Over-explanation is about fear. People who are grounded don't rush to be understood. They trust that their decisions don't require consensus. They recognize that some questions are requests for information and others are attempts to regain influence. When you answer every question with detail, you blur that distinction. This is why mentally strong people are often quiet. Not withdrawn, but deliberate. They speak when it matters. They let silence do its work. They don't feel responsible for managing every emotional reaction in the room. Silence, when used consciously, is not avoidance. It's restraint, and restraint is powerful. I noticed that when I stopped explaining myself, interactions changed. Some people leaned in with curiosity. They asked better questions. Others grew frustrated. They were used to access, used to context, used to having insight into my reasoning. When that access disappeared, so did their sense of control. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. Not explaining yourself is not about being mysterious or withholding. It's about honoring your inner clarity. It's about trusting that you don't need to translate your every move to be valid, that your choices are allowed to exist without narration. This doesn't mean shutting people out. It means choosing who deserves your reasoning. Mentally strong people explain themselves to those who seek understanding, not to those who demand justification. That distinction protects your energy. Over time, you begin to feel lighter. Conversations become simpler. Decisions feel cleaner. You stop replaying interactions in your head, wondering if you said enough or too much. You start to notice how often silence resolves things that words complicate. Not everyone responds well to this shift. Some people will accuse you of being distant, of changing, of becoming hard to read. But what they're really reacting to is the loss of access to your internal process. They can no longer track your thoughts, anticipate your moves, or influence your direction through emotional pressure. And that can feel threatening. Mental strength accepts that reaction without hostility. You don't need to correct it. You don't need to defend your boundaries. You simply continue acting in alignment with yourself. Over time, the right people adjust. The wrong ones drift. That's not cruelty. It's alignment. Not explaining yourself also strengthens your relationship with yourself. Each time you resist the urge to justify, you reinforce self-trust. You signal to your nervous system that it's safe to stand firm. That discomfort doesn't mean danger. That silence doesn't mean rejection. That lesson compounds. Eventually, you stop feeling the need to preempt misunderstanding. You allow people to interpret as they will. You let assumptions exist without chasing them down. You realize that clarity doesn't come from controlling perception. It comes from consistency. When your actions are steady, explanations become unnecessary. This chapter isn't about becoming unreachable. It's about becoming rooted, about knowing when to speak and when to let things be, about understanding that your life doesn't need to make sense to everyone to be meaningful. You don't owe the world a detailed map of your inner terrain. You owe yourself honesty. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself the freedom to choose without permission. The quiet power of not explaining yourself isn't loud or dramatic. It won't earn applause, but it will give you something far more valuable: inner authority. And once you have that, you'll find that fewer words are needed, because your presence already speaks for you. Chapter 8. When you stop needing to be liked, you start leading yourself. There is a quiet shift that happens when you no longer need approval to feel secure. It doesn't arrive with confident speeches or dramatic moments of self-assertion. It shows up in ordinary decisions, in how you spend your time, in what you tolerate, in what you walk away from without explanation. And slowly, you realize something fundamental has changed. You're no longer being led by reactions. you are leading yourself. For most people, leadership feels external. It's associated with influence, authority, or being followed. But the most important form of leadership happens long before anyone else is involved. It's the ability to guide your own behavior without outsourcing direction to praise or criticism. When you stop needing to be liked, that internal leadership finally becomes possible. Before that shift, your choices are often reactive. You adjust to moods. You soften to avoid tension. You push yourself when validation is available and hesitate when it isn't. Your life moves, but not always in a direction you've consciously chosen. It's shaped by invisible pressures, expectations, approval, fear of disappointment. I didn't realize how much of my life was governed this way until it wasn't anymore. When I stopped chasing acceptance, I expected conflict. I expected distance. What I didn't expect was clarity. Decisions became simpler, not easier, but cleaner. I could feel when something aligned and when it didn't. There was less negotiation inside my head. That internal quiet is the foundation of self-leadership. Mental strength isn't about forcing discipline or silencing emotion. It's about reducing noise. When you're no longer constantly monitoring how you're perceived, your mind frees up space. You think more clearly. You notice patterns. You recognize what matters and what doesn't without needing consensus. This is where many people misunderstand mental strength. They think it's about becoming rigid or detached. In reality, it's about becoming responsive instead of reactive. You're still engaged with the world. You still care. But your actions come from intention, not pressure. When you lead yourself, you stop asking, "How will this be received?" and start asking, "Is this true for me?" That question becomes your compass. It doesn't guarantee comfort. It doesn't promise approval. But it does create integrity, and integrity is stabilizing in a way approval never is. I noticed this most clearly during moments of uncertainty, situations where there was no obvious right answer, no reassurance available. In the past, I would have looked outward, seeking feedback, testing reactions, waiting for confirmation. Now, I paused. I listened inward. I trusted the sense of alignment I had been building. That trust didn't appear overnight. It grew through repetition, through choosing clarity over comfort, through allowing myself to be disliked without collapsing. Each time I acted in alignment, even when it was uncomfortable, that trust strengthened. Self-leadership is built that way, quietly, incrementally. It also changes how you experience responsibility. When approval no longer motivates you, responsibility becomes internal. You take ownership of your choices because they're yours, not because you want them validated. That ownership brings a different kind of seriousness to life, a steadiness. You're no longer performing accountability. You're living it. This shift affects every area of your life. Your work becomes more focused because you're not trying to impress. Your relationships become more honest because you're not negotiating acceptance. Your time becomes more protected because you're not spending it to earn worth. You begin to see how much energy you once spent managing perceptions, and you feel the relief of redirecting that energy toward things that actually move your life forward. Leading yourself doesn't make you immune to doubt. Doubt still appears. Fear still shows up. But they no longer control your direction. They become signals instead of commands. You acknowledge them without obeying them. That's mental strength in action. There's also a humility that comes with this kind of leadership. You stop needing to be right. You stop needing to be seen a certain way. You become more flexible because your identity isn't on the line in every interaction. Paradoxically, this makes you stronger, not weaker. People notice this, not always consciously, but they feel it. They sense when someone is self-directed, when someone isn't fishing for response or affirmation. That presence creates a quiet respect, not because you demand it, but because you embody consistency. But even if no one noticed, the shift would still matter. Because self-leadership isn't about influence, it's about coherence. About living in a way that doesn't fracture you internally. About making choices you don't have to recover from emotionally. About waking up without the weight of self-betrayal. When you stop needing to be liked, you don't become indifferent to others. You become more selective with yourself. You choose your responses. You choose your commitments. You choose your direction. That choice is freedom, not the loud kind, the grounded kind. This chapter marks the turning point, not the end of discomfort, but the beginning of agency. From here on, your life isn't shaped by who approves or disapproves. It's shaped by what aligns. You may still be misunderstood. You may still disappoint people. You may still feel moments of loneliness, but you'll also feel something deeper and more stable. You'll feel self-directed, and once you experience that, once you realize you can guide your own life without applause, you stop chasing approval, not because you don't care, but because you've found something better. You've learned how to lead yourself. And that is where mental strength becomes a way of living, not just a way of thinking. Peace over popularity. If there is one truth to take with you from this audiobook, let it be this. You are never meant to live as a reflection of other people's expectations. You are meant to live as a grounded, self-directed person, clear in your values, calm in your decisions, and steady in who you are, even when no one is applauding. Mental strength does not come from being admired. It comes from being aligned. When you stop needing to be liked, you don't lose connection with the world. You lose the need to perform for it. You stop shaping your identity around reactions. You stop adjusting your inner compass to match external noise. And in that quiet shift, you regain something essential, yourself. Throughout this journey, we've talked about boundaries, misunderstanding, calm confidence, loss, and silence. Not as tactics, but as consequences. Because mentally strong people don't try to be distant, misunderstood, or independent. They simply choose honesty over approval, and everything else follows. That choice is rarely comfortable at first. You may feel guilt when you say no. You may feel exposed when you stop explaining yourself. You may feel lonely when familiar relationships fade. But those feelings are not signs you're doing something wrong. They are signs you're leaving behind an old survival pattern, one built on being agreeable instead of being true. Strength grows in those moments, quietly, repeatedly. Each time you choose clarity over comfort. Each time you let someone feel disappointed without rescuing them. Each time you allow yourself to be misunderstood without rushing to correct the story. And over time, something changes inside you. Your mind becomes quieter, your decisions become cleaner, your energy becomes more protected. You begin to trust yourself, not because life becomes easier, but because you're no longer betraying yourself to make it smoother. You realize that peace doesn't come from being liked by everyone. It comes from being able to live with yourself. This is not a call to withdraw from others. It's a call to meet them from a place of wholeness, to engage without overgiving, to care without collapsing, to connect without performing. Some people will step away when you do this. Others will meet you more deeply than before. Both outcomes are part of the same alignment. You don't need to force either one. What matters is that you are no longer abandoning yourself in the process. Mental strength isn't loud. It won't announce itself. But it will show up in how you move through your days, in the way you handle tension without panic, in the way you choose your words without urgency, in the way you stand still when the world expects you to bend. That steadiness is rare, and it's built, not given. As you move forward, remember this. You don't need permission to live honestly. You don't need approval to be grounded, and you don't need to be liked to be at peace. If this audiobook resonated with you, it's likely because some part of you is already ready to stop performing and start leading yourself. Trust that part. Return to it often. Build your life around alignment, not applause. And if you know someone who is still exhausting themselves, trying to please everyone, someone who feels lost, drained, or quietly resentful, share this with them. Not to convince them, but to remind them that another way of living exists. A calmer one, a clearer one, a stronger one. You don't need a world that likes you. You need a life you can stand behind. And that is where real mental strength begins.